Ladies and gentlemen, welcoming to the Ray Carr Show is Dennis Chandler. Dennis Chandler is one of the premier experts on rock and roll, I would say. A great pianist, songwriter, musical chameleon, as I saw on your website.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of ways to describe what I do, but I try to represent the Lord in all my performances and try. I mean, it's always difficult because you're being attacked from all sides. And I don't mean personal attacks or any of that, just emotional things that you have to deal with on a daily basis and frustrations and things that you can't control that you get involved with. But recognizing the difference is part of life. And
I would agree. Dennis, before we start, Cindy's on my show with me, and she wanted me to say hi to you.
Oh, man, I haven't talked to her for an age.
Cindy speaks very highly of you.
Yeah, we go way back. Wow, moved to the 80s.
Crazy times.
Yeah.
Dennis, how did you know? What was the moment that you realized that rock and roll was just more than a fad with you? It was something that was really part of your fabric.
Probably I was 11.
Uh-huh.
12, hearing things. I'll tell you, you want to hear the story about the radio dial, it's always an interesting one, because when I was first introduced to popular music, it wasn't called, well, I mean, Alan Freed, I mean, I'm a little bit too young to have experienced the Moondog and all that stuff. I mean, I knew of it. I was little. But as far as the first exposure, I would have to credit Bill Randall. And I'm sure you come across him, right?
Definitely Bill Randall, yeah. I talked to Michael Shesky about him, and I learned quite a bit about him.
Well, I got to meet him years later, and we talked about this experience. And because, again, when you're 12 years old and you hear something that sounds good to you, it just stuck. I started taking piano lessons when I was 11, and I took violin when I was 7. I was playing in the elementary orchestra. And I'm in junior high school at Euclid Central Junior High School. And I want to say I was in maybe the 8th grade. And they're going to have an assembly. So it's going to be a musical assembly. And I was already interested in music. I hadn't been exposed to the pop music to any extent at that time. So Bill Randall comes to the school. He brings this guy with him. And this guy had white bucks. He was dressed very nice, young guy. Probably, I mean, he was a man to me. I mean, anybody over 18 years old, it was old. And because a kid that's 12. So he gets up there and starts singing, "You made me cry when you said goodbye." And I said, "Oh, wow."
Wow.
And then he starts singing, "Crazy little mama come knocking at my front door." I said, "I know." And then he starts singing, "One heart's not enough, baby." I said, "No, I like that." And it was Pat Boone. He brought Pat Boone to the school. But I'm listening to Pat Boone sing, and he was playing. It was all, of course, he was lip syncing his records, and I'm listening to the style of what he's singing, and I'm thinking to myself, it's good, but I'm not sure. I like the style, I like the beat, but I can't believe that is him, that he is the first person to do these songs.
Yeah.
I get home and I asked my mother. I said, I saw Bill Randall brought this Pat Boone. Oh yeah, Pat Boone. He's popular on the radio. Arthur Godfrey's telling me a little bit about how Pat Boone got exposure. He was on the Arthur Godfrey talent show or whatever Arthur Godfrey had at the time. And I said, yeah, okay. I mean, I like it, but I just don't. I just can't accept it. That it was too articulate for me. especially when he started, crazy little mama come, crazy little mama. That just didn't sound like an expression to come out of a guy like Pat Boone.
No, right.
So I go on the radio and I'm in the center of the dial. I have no idea what station I was listening to. And here's Pat Boone singing the same song I heard him in the radio. And I started turning the dial on the radio. Remember, there were no push buttons or remotes or any of that stuff. You had a push button in the car, but you had dials.
Yeah.
So I go down to the other end of the dial, way down at the bottom. And I hear, you made me cry. And you said, ain't that a shame? And I said, now, that sounds good. And then I come to find out that that's Fats Domino. And then I come down to find out that, gonna tell Aunt Mary about, I come to find out that's Little Richard. Then I come to find out that Crazy Little Mama at my front door is the Eldorados.
Yes.
And I said, now, that's what I want to play. That's what I wanted. That's when I was first exposed to it. I didn't know what rock and roll was, but I did find out where it came from. And I was 12 years old. So I spent all my time at that end of the dial, and I was getting a baptism of the original versions of all this stuff. And I'm thinking, and then I go up the other end of the dial and hear Georgia Gibbs and Eddie Fisher and Perry Como trying to sing Dungaree Dow, and wait, now that's not going to get it done. And I'm back down listening to Fats Domino sing Blueberry Hill and The Fat Man and Blue Monday and So Long and all this stuff, and I'm thinking, I want to learn how to do that. So that was my first exposure to it. And of course, then there's the only rock and roll cornerstone. In my opinion, that building we have down there, I'm not real happy with the design, but it does have 4 corners. And then, that was the other thing I heard, Bo Diddley. And then that rhythm, that was it. And I said, that's what I want to play. That's what I want to do. But in my opinion, for what it's worth, having, again, reinforced all of what I had at 12 years old, there are 4 people that are the creators. Oh, and I forgot to tell you about Maybelline and
Chuck Berry.
Stuff that I'm hearing at that end of the dial. But as far as I'm concerned, there's 4 corners. And everything else is built on those 4 corners. And those 4 people are Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and Fats Domino. Those are the cornerstones of rock and roll. And nobody can ever change my mind on that. And they'll ask me about the other players and the other people. Yes, they had an impact on it, but they just brought, in my opinion, they brought attention to the originators, because when they started doing their stuff, it was all Southern music, black music, Negro music, call it what you want. But that's where rock and roll came from. That's the evolution of any American music that's ever been created that's called true American music. That's where it came from, the cotton fields.
Dennis Chandler, our special guest here on the Ray Carr Show. Dennis, I also want to add one name to that. What about Louis Jordan?
Louis Jordan was prior to the pop rock guys. Louis Jordan, I talked to his wife quite deeply when we were at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when they broke ground for it. And I was sitting around with Ruth Brown and Louis Jordan's wife. Louis Jordan was, let's have some fun. You only live once, and when you're dead, you're done. I mean, he made such statements. But the guy who actually was working with him at the time, who played on his records, was Bill Doggett.
Oh, I love Bill Doggett.
Oh, well, there's a rock and roll history tragedy. Bill Doggett's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. #1 rock and roll instrumental of all time.
Honky Tonk.
Honky Tonk. Exactly.
Yeah.
And when I heard that guitar solo and the sax solo, I have never heard anybody play it. And Bill and I talked about this in great length when I was playing at the Theatrical Gorilla, and he came in and he was the main act, and I was the piano player that played in between his sets. And one of my thrills in life was to be able to take my guitar out and play that guitar solo for him note for note, and he just flipped out. He went nuts. Because there were, I don't know if you know the guys, Billy Butler and Clifford Scott, that were in the band at the time, that played those monumental solos. That sax solo influenced more sax players, and to this day, I have never heard a sax player do what Clifford Scott did on that solo. I mean, note for note. The funny part about it, Bill told me that the way that song evolved, they just went in the studio and jammed. They never played it the same way twice. There were 4 cuts. They cut it 4 different ways, and they listened to it, and they said, okay, that one sounds good. Let's use that one. We'll call it Honky Tonk. That's how the song happened. King Records.
Yeah, and it was a Honky Tonk 1 and 2. Yeah,
that was a flip side because and if you listen to it carefully, the way it fades out and the way part 2 comes in, it really was a carryover because they couldn't get it all on one side of a 45 record, and there were no extended play records at that time to put it on the same side.
Yeah.
The only reason it was on 2 sides. There is a 78. I have a 78 of that.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
In fact, I just up not too long ago a 78 of Maybelline.
Well, that's
the 78s are charming because that was the transition from 45 to 78 during that time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the last 78 was made in 1958 or something.
That is true. That was carryover. I have some of my favorite. I really like Tennessee Ernie's 16 Tons, and I have that on a 78. And I got Shaboom on a 78. I got a lot of them. Life is But a Dream by the Earls. Then the crew cuts called it Shaboom. Well, we won't go into that stuff. But anyway, the truth is just listen to the music. That'll tell you the truth. That'll tell you where it all came from. Call it any name you want. Little Richard told me, and this is a quote because he has said this, and he said it a couple of different times. He said the blues had a baby and they called it rock and roll. And that's the truth. I mean, that's a one-liner, and it tells the whole story right there.
Wow, that's a great way of saying it, too. Dennis Chandler, our special guest here on the Ray Carr Show. We're going to go over a lot of stuff. We've talked about some great rock and roll history already. Dennis, let me ask you about a place that I never was able to go to, but I hear many stories about it, Leo's Casino. What was it like, and where was it at?
Well, they called it Quad Hall. It was on Euclid Avenue. There were 2 of them. There was one that was a little further. I couldn't tell you the actual street number. But my memory of Leo's Casino is where all of the rock and roll acts of the day would come to appear. And I had already become quite close with B.B. King at the time, and I did fill in for him playing piano on many, many occasions. My strongest recollection of Leo's Casino is when I was fortunate enough to be there at what I call the epitome of blues shows. So I've never heard another one as good. And although I had the blessing to be at the Ann Arbor Blues Festival with Robert Jr. Lockwood in 1974, B.B. insisted that I meet him and get close with him. And God bless him. He was just another mentor to me. But that's another story. Leo's Casino, again, every weekend they would have all the Motown acts. They'd have all the individual acts. They just have Leo Frank was just an amazing guy to put that whole thing together. And it was the place to go. The beauty of the place, though, it wasn't, how do you say this gracefully? Everybody came there. It didn't matter what you looked like, what you wore, but you, out of respect, nobody went down there in jeans and a T-shirt. That was not acceptable. You just don't do that. And I don't do that to this day when I perform. I mean, we dress to reflect the honor of the music and the people that made it. I mean, if you look at the performers of those days, you never saw anybody go out there that didn't look immaculate as far as their dress. There were no wrinkles in the suits. All their moves matched, all their clothes matched, and they were just such a positive reflection of the music that they were making. And music was the thing. But going back to Leo's, I'm sorry if I drift off because I get excited about this stuff. Oh, that was the blues show of blues shows, and I had good fortune to play and meet my mentors for the first time. On the show, BB was the headliner, but Muddy Waters, T-Bone Walker, and the most marvelous soul of the blues, Jimmy Reed. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, it was just, I can't describe it. There's no words. There's no words to. I mean, here's a 20-some-year-old kid going down there with the iconic blues performers of the day, and these guys were not strangers to me, especially Jimmy Reed and T-Bone. Jimmy Reed, I mean, who could not recognize the impact of the music that he made? Heck, Elvis covered his songs.
Right. So
that was the blues show. But they didn't just do blues. They did jazz. They did pop. They did everything, all of it. And the people that I met there were only second to the people I met later at the front row. That was the other place. And then they had to tear that down and put a Home Depot there. But what could I say? Yeah. And before the Leos, though, there was another place that I couldn't get into because I was too young.
It's called Gleason's.
Gleason's.
Yeah.
At 55th and Woodland. And I remember Glenn Schwartz and I would go down there and just stand outside because we couldn't get in and listen to Freddie King. And BB would come there, and Albert King, and all those guys. Louis Jordan, you're talking about the real foundation of what you might call rock and roll music. Those were the two places. And then there was another one. There was another one on 69th and Superior that I went. You know, that was later in the 60s. In fact, I have 8mm footage of BB playing there, silent because they didn't have a sound. And
was it Le Cave?
It was called Gus's Show Bar.
Oh, okay.
Gus's Show Bar. J.L. Wright from WJMO was the MC. There's a character, too. Le Cave. Oh, I could tell you all kinds of stories about that place. I played there, and you wouldn't believe who came to hear us play. Jimi Hendrix was sitting in the front row in 1967 watching Glenn and I play. There was, of course, Paul Butterfield, Mike Bloomfield, James Cotton. I could go on and on with that place. That was another.
Well, Dennis, it's funny you mentioned Glenn Schwartz. He was on my show recently, and I never really realized how great of a guitar player he is. And then when I started watching him play, I go, he's really a virtuoso.
He was ahead of his time too. He was doing things, but if you ask him who his influences were, he's the guy that told me to listen to B.B. King. His influences were the same as mine, but I was more oriented to piano at the time. And when we were playing together in the Pilgrims, I mean, that was in the 60s, and when the Army came to both of us and said, "You're going," well, that took care of all that. But the fact when we were in Detroit and working with all these people, I had one distinct advantage, though, is I could read. I could read music, and I could read whatever keyboard charts they put in front of me to play. So I was best to be able to back up everybody that was a Motown, and I've kept a lot of those relationships alive. I mean, Mary Wilson and I are still talking to each other, friends, and we had a meeting and a reunion, but I played with, everybody from Smokey to Mary Wells to Arthur Reeves and all the rest of them. So there's a little Leo's history for you.
Well, I want to move on, Dennis. There's a couple of people in Cleveland history that I'd like to know more about. Milt Maltz.
Well, what could I tell you? WHK.
Yeah.
That was Milt Maltz. He was let's put it this way. He was a vehicle for this stuff because he didn't turn his back on it. He didn't say, "Oh, we're not going to play that on WHK. We're not going to do this on WHK." And in fact, when my band, the Stratophonics, which was formed in '82, and they went back to the oldies format, we were the house band for WHK. I mean, during the time when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was being considered for Cleveland, man, I was on that bandwagon getting signatures. In fact, I still have the original banners that were hung at Public Hall when I played with Chuck Berry, and he came in and we did that concert in '85. So I still have all that. The canvas banners. I got some rock and roll history here, too.
Well, I could imagine. Wasn't that the time when Eric Carmen recorded a song, "The Rock Stops Here"?
Yes, he did. And I had one called Can You Feel It, which was in Rolling Stone magazine. I still have the articles, bringing the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to Cleveland. And Eric and I are well, we're not intimate friends, but we certainly know each other and respect each other.
Very, because I've always tried to get Eric on the show, and it's been very difficult to do so because he has a huge place in Cleveland rock history.
He does, and he's kind of an eccentric guy, but once you get him going about this stuff, man, he'll share. He's wonderful. I mean, there's whatever the press says. Remember, they are trying to get people to listen and buy newspapers, and I don't have to tell you about the media. Eric Carmen's a straight-ahead guy. He's a lovable guy, and he's warm and wonderful. That's all I can say.
And I also noticed there's a few people on your website that I remember from my past, Dorothy Fulltime and Mary Strassmeyer.
Well, if you remember, well, you wouldn't remember, but there was a guy on television, Goulardi.
Oh, I remember Ernie.
Who used to make fun of Dorothy. Dorothy was a mentor to me too, but her partner on the 1 O'Clock Club was even more of a mentor to me, and that was Bill Smoochie Gordon. I remember going down there. I did some jingle work and some theme work for Channel 5 at the time, and I wrote, and when they had the Morning Exchange and Jan Jones and Joel Rose, and I mean, there's some other terrific people. Cleveland has a history. What Dorothy told me, I remember her saying, Cleveland eats its babies alive. She always felt that we didn't do enough for our hometown people. We always had to go someplace else in order to be recognized for whatever talent you had. And there's a lot to that. And I kind of agree to some extent. But the city doesn't do anything like that. It's the people of the city. You take the largest building and call it whatever you want. But without people inside of it, it's just a shell. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Dorothy was another character in the movie of history of Cleveland. She had her opinions. She was well respected. And she's in the same category, maybe a few years older than Jane Scott. These people were supportive of Cleveland. They didn't condemn anything anybody did, whether it was music. Maybe they didn't necessarily care for the style, but they didn't shut it down. I mean, you think about Don Webster and the Big Five show, and when we played on that, and Joey and the Continentals, and all of the Baki and the Visions, and all those groups that played Big Five show, whether it's the GPOs, which just a different name for the same band. It was just a way. I mean, that was our American bandstand. In my opinion, it was just as good.
Yeah, there was another guy in history of Cleveland that a lot of people may have forgotten, Pete Mad Daddy Myers.
Oh, Oobla Dee. Oobla Doodyville. That's what he wanted to talk about. And Johnny Holiday. I want to finish Mary Strassmeyer.
Okay, sure.
And her column, that was the society column of the day. And Mary would always have, I mean, she had an edge to what she said, but if you really read what she said, there was never any fiction in it. It was all right from the heart, and it was true. And she would always say that drawl, she'd say, nobody's going to want to hear that. Because we would, well, maybe they would. I might be able to use that. She was the society gal, and she was a character. She was a lot of fun. Like I told you before, my experience with any of these people is nothing but positive. And to try to get me to say something negative about them, that's not going to happen, because in my opinion, there isn't anything to say. You have your opinions, and I have mine, and I just think that that's all the cosmopolitan chemistry of what Cleveland's about.
Yeah.
A lot of people saying a lot of different things. Pick and choose what you want to believe and what you want to take with you. But if you're listening to this, you're hearing the facts and the truth, because I have no other way to express myself.
Yes. Yeah. And this person knows that person. And And it just grows like a tree, and the branches keep going different directions, but they all come back to the same place.
Isn't that something? Yeah. Well, that's why you have to be consistent, because you just never know who's going to hear what you say and who's going to watch what you do.
I completely agree with you, yes.
And you got to reflect the Lord in your actions. And if everybody did that, wow, as the song says, what a wonderful world.
Right. And, obviously the golden rule applies. You got to be able to treat, especially in the music business, which doesn't always happen, where people don't always treat each other with respect and honor. And that's where a lot of problems begin.
Well, I'm in the first stages of writing my book. I've got about 100 pages, and I haven't even got to college yet. But the interesting thing is, if people are looking for controversy, don't talk to me, because I don't have any. All of the experiences I've had with these people have been 100% positive, and whatever they did in their personal lives, I don't care. That has nothing to do with the relationship that I had with them. I didn't see that. I don't need to know that, and I don't want to talk about it because it didn't affect me on a direct basis, and it certainly isn't anything that I would be proud to talk about because it's not relevant. That's my feeling. And everybody is looking for, dirt. Well, don't look to me, because I'm not going to talk about that.
Okay.
In my opinion, as far as the people in the relationships that I have. Where do you live?
I live in Lakewood.
Oh, okay. That's still a suburb of Cleveland.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's the first suburb west of Cleveland.
Of course. Well, the reason I ask that, because it's so big now, it's almost its own little country, because everything is over there. I mean, you got every background of every kind of people you can imagine. I think it's a wonderful place. It
is interesting, and growing up here, it's really evolved into more of a melting pot these days than it was when I was younger.
It's absolutely true. If you want a diverse population to talk to and share with and learn from, you couldn't get a better place where it's dense with those kind of people where you share and learn. That's the way I look at it. I mean, there's a lot of people who just have a problem with anything that's different than the way they are. As far as I'm concerned, that's the way you learn. That's the way you grow. The more you share, the more you learn, the more you benefit, the more you understand, and the more you accept.
And that's what's happened to me in radio is where, I thought I knew a little bit, but I didn't know anywhere near as much as when I start talking to people like yourself and other people, and I start opening my mind up and listening, the information just starts flowing to me, and I never knew half the stuff that I'm listening to, and it's such a great learning experience for me.
Yeah, it's amazing how the brain works, and you assemble all this information, or at least you think you forgot it all until somebody draws it out of you. And sometimes you can't realize how much you did absorb because somebody's going to tap you into thinking about something you haven't thought about in 30 years or whatever. And here it comes like it's yesterday. And these experiences that I've had with all of these musicians over the years, it just seems like it happened. I mean, I remember it as though it was yesterday.
Dennis,
the Mad Daddy, he was on WHK. That was and then the other guy that was really strong was the other guy who I'm still very close with is Johnny Holiday. He was the disc jockey of the day with WHK. Even Bill Gordon was on WHK for a while. But he didn't like rock and roll. He was a jazz guy. But he was one that he had just the way he talked in rhyme. I think I still have some tapes of Pete Meyer's show. I recorded them on reel-to-reel, and then I transferred them because I would record American Bandstand too on my old Webcore reel-to-reel tape recorder.
Wow.
He was I don't know what you want me to say about him other than I never met him. Well, I did meet him. I shook hands with him a couple of times, but I never knew him like I knew Bill Gordon or some of these other people we're talking about. He was just he was so short-lived in Cleveland. He wasn't here that long. And then he moved on, or at least he thought he did. Pete Mad Daddy Myers, it was more, he was an entertainer. Let's put it that way. He didn't just play records. And that organ thing that he did, his theme, I don't even know what that was. I can hear a little bit of it, but I always related that to Bill Doggett playing organ.
Yeah.
So, unless I can flash back 1 second, Bill Doggett was an organ player that worked with Louis Jordan. And if you look at the arrangements on some of Louis Jordan's sheet music, it's arranged, and Bill Doggett was the arranger and the organ player. Everybody thought Bill Doggett was the guitar player. He wasn't a guitar player. He was the organ player.
Wow.
His foot played a better bass than a lot of bass players could ever think about. His foot was phenomenal. His left foot playing the Hammond B3 bass pedals, just incredible. You'd swear it was a Fender Precision bass that he was playing, but it wasn't his left hand. Not doing single finger bass runs. No, he didn't do that. He used foot, and his left hand played full chords. Guy was a phenomenal organ player.
Well, interesting stuff. Dennis Chandler, our special guest here on the Ray Carr Show. Dennis, let me fast forward a bit. I believe it was 1980. I could be wrong, or it could be 81, but the Woolly Bear song that you wrote.
Yes, sir. That came about because I had been doing the Woolly Bear. I'm still doing it. The only year that I missed is 1987, when I was in the hospital with leukemia, when the Woolly Bear Festival was happening. That's the only year that I've missed since 1978. And Dale Solly, God rest his soul, he and I were thinking about the Woolly Bear. We should have a song. So I sat down and we got together, I put together some words with my brother-in-law, Phil, and then let's make this a nice, soft story. So we went to Dick and said, hey, Dick, we got this idea, and we want to record this. Go ahead, do it. So what we did on one side of the record, we had the lyrics. On the other side of the record is the rhythm tracks with Dick telling the whole story of the Woolly Bear and how the tiger moth and all that stuff. And then another guy came out with the Woolly Bear March or something. I think the year later, everybody's trying to climb on the bandwagon, but the Woolly Bear song. And then we pressed it at over on Union. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. I'll think of it. That'll come to me. It's one of those moments where you forget what you're talking about. But anyway, we did it at a local studio here, and we pressed, I forget, 5,000 of them. All the money went to the Valley Save-A-Pet, because that was Dick's thing then, even. So it was successful. Now it's kind of a cult record. If you see them on eBay, they're going for $15, $20 or more.
Yeah, it's. I listened to it the other day, and I go, I heard this back when I was in high school, and then I forgot about it. Then, when I knew I was going to interview you, I went back and listened to it again. I go, interesting, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing, the tapestry, how it's all woven together, and the Lord has the needle and the thread.
Dennis, what was a project that you were involved in that a lot of people weren't aware of, that you're very proud of?
Well, I have to say, every performance that I make, every time that I play, is a moment I'm proud of. To be able to do it, to be able to reach people. I played yesterday. This is Sunday. No, my last performance was Friday. I taught on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I performed on Thursday and Friday. I played solo piano, and I talked to people. I guess you could call it music therapy. And I watch people that are a little bit older than most of us, who are, for whatever reason, I wouldn't call it nursing homes. I don't play in those. I play in independent living facilities where people, maybe they just don't want to take care of a house anymore.
Yeah.
And they just want to just enjoy life and not have any responsibilities and just fraternize and talk to people and just enjoy what they do. So I go into these places, and one of them is Wiggins and Lenora Park. In fact, that's where I was on Thursday, and the other was Aberdeen Crossing, which is in Highland Heights, and I'm at the Renaissance on the west side, and I go to many of these places, and I got standing engagements there, at least sometimes once or twice a month. And I play songs and I tell stories. And I guess I call myself an edutainer. I wish I could take credit for that word, but that was Samuel L. Jackson's word about somebody who not only entertains but educates at the same time. And I try to do that because I've been blessed to not only know a lot of it about this music, but I met a lot of the people that have written the music and are far more qualified than I am. And it's just so warm and wonderful to watch people who, for whatever reason, have maybe forgotten a few things or have health issues. And you see them who haven't heard or been motivated by this music that they know of for 50 years. Maybe they haven't heard the song in 50 or 60 years, and they know every word. Some of them don't even know where they are, but they know every word to these songs. And I'm thinking, wow, is that wonderful? And I hate to use the word wonderful all the time, but it's true. There's not a better adjective to describe it. It's just how it is. It's a warm feeling that you get by doing something that people appreciate. If I'm up on stage playing my guitar and doing my Bo Diddley set, or I'm doing my tribute to Duane Eddy, or I'm doing my tribute to the Ventures, or I'm doing my tribute to B.B. King or Chuck Berry or Fats Domino or Little Richard, all the other ones that I do my little tribute to, whether it's guitar or piano, and watch people. And I don't play the common songs. I let every other band play the common songs. I have, instead of a playlist, I have a no playlist. There are certain songs, and I won't name them now, but I think you can get it.
Yeah.
That everybody plays, and it's the same song. And what I feel badly about is the kids who are listening to this first generation of rock and roll music are hearing, is that all there is to the first generation of rock and roll music? And they hear the same bands playing the same songs over and over. I said, you want to hear the first generation of rock and roll music? You come and listen to me. And then you'll hear the rest of the songs. And if you obviously are a statistician, if you are studying history, and just go into the Billboard, if you want to, not top 40, go into the top 100. Look how many songs were charted between what you want to call the first decade of rock and roll, 1952. I mean, when the 60-Minute Man or any of that stuff came out and the doo-wop groups were starting to happen. Through 1969, look how many charts, or how many songs were on the Billboard 100 during those years, from 52 to 69. And then look at the playlists of any radio stations, including the satellite radio station, that seems to think they have the depth of the playlist. And you'll find that most of those stations have about 12 to 1,500 songs on their playlists. Well, when I was doing my radio show, I had just instrumentals. I had 800 songs on CD that were just instrumentals. Before you get into any of the rest of it, it's estimated that 20 to 25,000 songs were charted during those years.
Huh.
The radio stations played 1,500 of them.
Holy mackerel.
Most of the rest of them, there are some obscure ones in there, believe me. But you got to go below the top 10 to really hear what was being played on the radio at the time when this word rock and roll was in its prime. And that's what bothers me a little bit, that kids aren't really exposed to the depth of this stuff. And I could use an example. When you talk about Chuck Berry or Fats Domino, you got to go below the number one songs that they had to hear what kind of magnificent music they recorded and what they played. Little Richard, Bo Diddley. I mean, I probably have the only complete set of Bo Diddley albums from his very first album to his last album that are signed by Bo Diddley. I have every one of them. I took him to one of the shows that I did with him, and I said, Bo, do me a favor, because he was my mentor. we could spend 2 hours just going through my history with him.
Right.
Another 6 hours going through my history with B.B. King, and then you want to keep going, we go nuts. And because these aren't just passing things, these are experiences that are lifelong. From the time I met B.B. till he passed away, heck, I was with him. Sonny Geraci, we haven't talked about him yet. I mean,
yeah, I was going to get to him next. Sonny he's great.
We'll save him for a few minutes from now if you still want to continue with this.
Sure.
But the relationship, Bo Diddley took the place of my father, and so did B.B. King. He took the place of my father. That's my father, and I'm not even going to tell you. You can just think about what kind of music he said I was playing, and that's as far as I'm going with that. And I could not understand it, and to this day I don't understand it. But that's rest in peace, Father. And I feel strongly about these relationships and how they made me who or what I am, whatever that is. I do want to mention, if I can, the first famous person that I ever backed up.
Who is that?
Yeah, you're not going to believe this, but it's so true. It's a she. And story, briefly, it's a long story, but I'll try to shorten it because I don't have anything called a short story, because I remember details. She came to our high school to promote her record, Tall Paul.
Oh, yeah, 1959.
Yeah, and the next song she had recorded that was going to be released was Lonely Guitar. And she wanted to do a couple things live, so we had a little band, and we were told that she's coming and get a couple songs together. So Annette Funicello was the first famous person that I ever had the privilege of playing backup for. And if she was a little thing, but she was gorgeous. I mean, all the kids watched her grow up. I knew I couldn't wait to get home to watch the Mickey Mouse Club. And she was beautiful, but she was really short. She couldn't have been more than 5'2", but she was just charming. She had a chaperone, of course, with her, and we spent some time together talking about just her history. And later on, when she had her battles with health, I sent her several letters about trying to stimulate her to remember what we had talked about. Unfortunately, she was not well enough to respond to them, but she was always close to me in my heart because of that magic moment that I had with her in 1959. Wow,
that's an amazing story. Dennis Chandler, our very special guest here on the Ray Carr Show. Go ahead.
Okay, next.
Oh, I'm sorry. What I wanted to ask you is about your trains. I know that I talked to Chris Axelrod, and he mentioned to me that you have one of the largest Lionel train collections in the world.
Well, I don't know if it's in the world, but I think it's at least in the country or this area or whatever. I started collecting trains when I was a little kid. I really wasn't a collector. My dad bought me my first train. And he said, if you take care of it, we'll add to it. If you like it, we'll add to it. So one piece at a time, I've assembled, and I'm still very active in it, and I've assembled a virtual complete post-war Lionel train collection. And post-war is all the trains they made from 1945 until they went out of business in 1969. That's the area that I specialize in, which is, again, called the golden era of Lionel trains. Same thing, it's the golden era of rock and roll music. I mean, even if you go back into the 40s musically, you'll hear influences of music that was to become rock and roll. And one of the songs that I use as a cornerstone song, or one that influenced, or I'm sure the writers of the song may have even were influenced by people like Duke Ellington and Lionel Hampton, and my idols as far as piano playing, Oscar Peterson, Art Tatum, and Teddy Wilson. They're the best piano players ever. And when you listen to their styles and what they were doing in the 40s, when you talk about Duke Ellington and Count Basie and those guys, and going back into the earlier history where you talk about Jelly Roll Morton and Lead Belly, and the stuff didn't all come into vogue in the 1950s. This was festering. It was growing. It was ready to explode all through the early part of the 20th century. I mean, when I did my dissertation on the first decade of rock and roll, all of these things had to be included because it isn't just one thing that happened. It wasn't a rock and roll explosion. It just took time to grow from seeds that were planted in the 1800s, even the late 1800s, in the speakeasies in these places. Heck, it's documented. I mean, I can't attest to this, but George Gershwin tells it in his biography. Where he went to hear music was the Cotton Club in Harlem. So this stuff was already migrating up here. I mean, you talk about Memphis and Chicago and cities that were influenced by this migration of music that all of a sudden somebody had a name for. It was just upbeat, happy, real music that you couldn't sit still. And this all happened. I mean, it's hard to put it all into a sentence or two or 15 minutes, but it's a combination of things. Of you look at the situation in the world today, or in at least the United States, because the world, all you hear are opinions. The only way you can know what's going on in the world is to be there and not read a story or hear somebody talk about it and watch pictures, because there's reasons that some of those things happen. And we're not privy to all that because we're only told what they want us to hear. So you don't get the depth and the truth. That's why I really get on my soapbox about the things that I have the experience with, so I can at least try to explain the factors that were going on. Heck, when Bo Diddley, people would come to hear his music and he couldn't even sleep in the hotel. He couldn't go to the restaurants. He couldn't drink in the water fountains. I mean, this stuff was bad for these people that were trying to create something different and do something different. And they could do it. And all the people that would go to want to hear this stuff, once they realized what was happening, they weren't the same as the people making the music, and yet the people making the music couldn't go where they were going. I think you get the message.
Yeah.
And I not only heard it from them, I saw it happen. I was there. I mean, I was actually worried they could go into some place and I couldn't. And that happened more often than not with B.B. and Bo Diddley, those are the two guys that I was the most intimate with of all the people I ever performed with. They were not only musicians, they were friends. We loved each other. When I was sick, the first two calls I got were from B.B. and Bo Diddley asking me what they could do for me if I needed anything. How could they help me? And I don't want to get emotional, but I tell you what, it would have been very difficult for me to survive the way I did without their help. That's all I'll say about that.
Dennis Chandler, our special guest. Dennis, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time and your stories, because they're very valuable to me and my listeners. And I'd like to have you back on again at some point in the future, but I really wanted to thank you for everything today. Well,
I'm happy to help. Somebody's got to tell the truth.
And that's what I want. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Is there anything else that you, as a final comment, you need? Or
well, Dennis, I'm holding a Lionel engine number 2026. My father bought me back in 1968 or something.
That came out in 53.
Oh, 53. But that's when I got it in the late 60s from that's he must have bought it from somebody. But I have this engine right in front of me right now. Is it worth anything?
Well, I'll tell you the story of the 2026. The 2026 was actually introduced in the late 40s, and there are two versions of it. Well, there's actually several variations of it, but the one I'll tell you about and describe it. If you look at the driving wheels on your engine,
yeah,
if they have what they call nickel rims, then it's the early one. If it doesn't have it, they're just steel wheels with no chrome or nickel rims around the three main drivers of the thing.
Yeah.
And it's a later one. So it's a what they call a relatively common engine of the time, because the set was $29.95, which by today's standards is probably $200 or $300, which is buy a Lionel train set today, they're ridiculously priced. But that's the new stuff, and as far as I'm concerned, there is no Lionel train after 1969. But that's my opinion. It's cataloged in 1953. If you look at the 1953, it came with 3 freight cars. There should be a tank car. There should be a little white Baby Ruth car. There might be a gondola. There might be a little red caboose that says 6017 on it. And as far as value, the value is the condition. If you have one of those 2026s, which is very rare to find, that is perfect condition, which means no scratches, no chips, no dents, no rust, paint is perfect, and you have the original boxes, you're probably looking at somewhere between $175 and $200. If you have an engine that has no boxes and has lots of playware, which most of them have because they were toys. Nobody thought that 60 or 70 years later, these things would be collector's items. Well, then you're probably looking at $35 to $40.
Okay.
And there's a tender that comes with it. Some of them had whistles in it. If you have the whistle tender, then it's probably in the $45 to $50 range. If you have the boxes, as I said before, you can double or triple the value, especially if the boxes are clean. And there are 3 things that determine the value of a Lionel train: condition, condition, and condition.
Okay. I think mine are in fairly good condition, but, you know, at the time when I got them as a kid, they were, like you mentioned, they were toys and you played with them.
It's still a good engine.
Yeah.
Run well. And if it needs a tune-up, bring it over.
I would love to. I'd love to see your trains, Dennis.
You're welcome. Come on over.
Okay. I may take you up on that soon.
Chris knows how to get here.
Okay.
he could be your chaperone.
Dennis, thank you. If I come across a copy on 45 of the Woolly Bear song, maybe you can autograph that for me.
Oh, I absolutely will. I may even have one laying around here somewhere. I have to go through my archives here, because I still have some of them, I think. I just got to find them. My wife has all that stuff filed and archived, and we can do that. I can do that one. I can also find the Pierogi Polka for you. That was my next.
Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted. That's right. I've been trying to find a copy of that. I forgot about that song.
Yeah, that's Joel Rose and Tana Carley and Jan Jones and McGool and Dale Sally, and oh man, that was quite an undertaking. That was, I don't know, that was kind of weird the way that came about, because Joel was the accordion player and he wanted to play a polka. I said, let's just come up with something different. And Sokolowski's was noted for its pierogies, and so many of the churches were doing pierogies. And then our favorite place we used to go to was a place on Ridge Road called the Ridgewood Inn, which is close to Snow, where pierogies were just oozing with butter and onions on every Friday night. In fact, I think they still do it. I think Peggy's still there. So we came up with this idea of, a lot of times you'd go to the churches to try to get pierogies, and they were out of them. So we told the story of what happens when you go and try to find them and they're not there. What are you going to do? So you go home and make them yourself. That's kind of what the story is about. But it's kind of an upbeat song. And that one, I'm trying to think what the charity was that we gave. We sold a lot of those records. That was a Channel 5 sponsored thing. Bodie was the recording studio that did both of these. Bodie was on Union Avenue, about 116th and Union.
Okay.
That's what it was. That was the recording. They did both the Woolly Bear song and the Pierogi Polka.
Wow.
And that's the picture jacket too. We didn't do the Woolly Bear song, I believe, has a picture jacket also. I have to see if
It does.
Yeah, I have to see if I have those. I have any of those. I may have. And And then, of course, the other one had a picture jacket. Now, the picture jackets were done by Ron Colpin, who at that time owned Cleveland Copy and Printing. They did all my picture jackets. They were on Chester, near 30th Street. They're not too far from Channel 5. So, yeah, the more you talk, see, the more I remember.
Dennis, there's one other guy. I'm good friends with Rich Spina. Do you have any information about Rich?
Rich he's funny. He seems to be everywhere. Billy Sullivan and Rich Spina are kind of inseparable. I'll tell you where our paths crossed is when we opened for Gary Lewis and the Playboys concert and Sonny Geraci, as a matter of fact, at the Packard Music Hall. And we were there, and Rich was there, and we haven't really been all that close, but he did give me a copy of what I'm trying to remember of he says, you got to learn how to use this. Computers were just coming into vogue, and he had a copy of Cakewalk. He says, take this home, try it out, see what you did. It's a musical, not notation software, but recording software that was just starting to come out. It was one of the early versions of it. Take this home, play with this, and see what. And then the other guy that comes to mind when you say Rich Spina is Chuck Rimbaldo. Chuck was another guy, Tommy Edwards Records, who was so supportive. In fact, I'm on the same team with Rich. We're both called Cleveland Legends of Rock and Roll, according to Chuck Rimbaldo, along with Billy Morris and some of the rest of the guys that are still around doing this stuff. And yeah, he's a lot of fun. That's all I could say about Rich. He's always got a smile on his face, and he is like me in some ways too, because he always has good to say. You'll never hear a bad word coming out of his mouth about anybody.
I agree.
I really respect him for that.
Yeah, Dennis, I really agree. And again, thank you for your time. And I will hopefully be able to get over there soon to see your collection and maybe talk more rock and roll.
I'm ready for you.
Thank you. Thank you again, sir.
Have a wonderful day, and you can sign off with this. That's my little toy guitar. I got a little electric toy guitar here.
That's very cool.
That's more like rock and roll. The first one was too country.
All right, my friend. Thank you.
Have fun. Enjoy your day.
I will, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you for considering me to do this. It's a privilege. Thank you.
Oh, it's an honor. It's my honor.
Well, and then it's an honor for both of us. Have fun.
All right, I will. Bye-bye.
That's the important thing. Have fun. If it isn't fun, don't do it.
Okay, I won't.
All right. Bye-bye.